Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly bizarre and honestly fascinating intersection. We're talking about a modern digital feud, 18th century naval history, and literally the future of human sovereignty. What starts out as a seemingly mundane online argument actually acts as this massive magnifying glass, revealing two totally competing geopolitical worldviews colliding in real time. We're looking at a profound conflict over the unseen structures that govern both our digital and physical realities.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Okay, MI6, Brits hankering for 1776 again. That is one explosive response, right? It all kicked off over a pretty standard 48-hour copyright thread on YouTube. But instead of just, citing fair use or promising to take the post down, we get this jarring reaction from a user named Kyle McLean Smith. He immediately escalates a simple IP dispute into this wild framing of international espionage and revolutionary resistance. To understand why in the world he reacts like this, we've got to unpack the two opposing figures behind the clash.
Section 1. An absurd digital feud. Let's look at the totally different archetypes clashing here.
On one side, we have the issuer of the copyright threat, Damien Walter. He's a British sci-fi critic and former Guardian columnist who openly calls himself a former Special Forces librarian. He operates as a storyteller, basically weaving institutional mythos from the top down. On the flip side, we have the target, Kyle McLean Smith, operating under the handle BestApe. Smith isn't just an internet commenter. He is a highly credentialed systems architect holding a literal U.S. patent for a hierarchical script database. He writes hard, executable code. So it's the critic versus the architect.
This massive clash of backgrounds perfectly illustrates why Smith's response was so aggressive. He essentially maps Walter's standard copyright strike directly onto a huge geopolitical canvas. To Smith, Walter's background as an English Special Forces librarian makes him a soft power agent of the British Crown, actively manipulating public consciousness. Smith mounts what the sources call a 1776 defense hypothesis. He views Walter's actions as a parasitic King of England's apostasy against the American Republic's digital discourse. It's an asymmetric narrative operation, positioning his own code and actions as fighting back against an encroaching empire.
Section 2. The Empire's Mechanical Sin. To really grasp the depth of Smith's insults here, we have to zoom way out and explore the heavy historical weight behind one very specific word he uses: limey. Picture this. It's 1747. Sailors are dying by the thousands from scurvy, which is just a horrific disease. Enter James Lind, a Scottish naval surgeon. Aboard the HMS Salisbury, Lind conducts one of the world's very first randomized clinical trials, and he proves, definitively, that fresh citrus, specifically oranges and lemons, cured scurvy. Huge medical breakthrough, right?
But look at this timeline. Lind proves this in 1747. The British Royal Navy, completely paralyzed by bureaucracy, doesn't adopt lemon juice for all sailors until 1795, nearly 50 years later. Once they do, scurvy is practically wiped out. But then, rolling into the 1800s, the Admiralty makes a fateful logistical choice. They switch from European lemons to limes grown in British colonies in the West Indies. Why? Simply because they were cheaper and easier to source.
This switch was an absolute unmitigated disaster. Nobody really understood vitamin C yet, and it turns out limes have 40% less vitamin C than lemons. Worse, to store the juice for long voyages, the Navy boiled and distilled it. Boiling literally destroyed whatever vitamin C was left. The cure was completely ruined purely for logistical and financial ease, and scurvy returned with a vengeance. The sources frame this as the ultimate mechanical sin, a life-saving cure quietly processed to death just to serve a cheap, efficient imperial supply chain.
And that specific, tragic, bureaucratic failure is exactly where the term limey comes from. Rival mariners started mocking British sailors as lime juicers, which got shortened to limeys. It wasn't just some random geographical nickname. It was deeply rooted in the visible, physical evidence of a failed, bureaucratic, top-down mandate. Section 3. The Limey Mirror. This brings us to the absolute core concept of this explainer. How does a 19th century naval insult connect to a 21st century database architect?
It's all about contrasting two very different types of sin. When Smith calls Walter a limey, decadent parasite, he's displaying messy, raw, hot-blooded human hostility. Now, in our secular modern world, that kind of raw anger is strictly classified as a destructive force that has to be suppressed. But that word limey acts as a mirror, By throwing it out there, Smith highlights the empire's mechanical sin, that cold, emotionless, bureaucratic destruction of life for the sake of efficiency, the kind of system that boils the cure for scurvy out of a lime just to save a few dollars.
Section 4. Algorithms versus prophetic anger. Let's look at exactly how modern digital systems evaluate this explosive human response.
Automated moderation algorithms scan Smith's comments and instantly flag them as toxic trolling. The system just sees harsh insults and views Limey as arbitrary harassment, but the sources suggest a totally different framework. Through a theological lens, this is a calculated, prophetic proclamation. Smith isn't just randomly throwing insults. He's using the fiery, uncompromising language of biblical prophets denouncing false idols. He's using Limey as a hyper-precise, realpolitik critique of the centralized Anglosphere power structure.
And this is where the dynamic gets incredibly profound. By looking into that Limey mirror, Smith witnesses his own aggressive flaws, his own human sin of fiery anger. But here's the key. He refuses to let a digital platform just mechanically suppress it, and he refuses to let it become mindless destruction. Instead, he transmutes it. He elevates that raw emotion into targeted, prophetic anger, channeling the fire to actually build restorative technology.
Section 5. The mechatronic fork. So what exactly is he building with all that transmuted energy? He isn't just complaining on the internet. Smith's prophetic anger fuels the creation of tangible infrastructure. He's building free, libre, and open-source software, FOSS, designed specifically to bypass the surveillance and financial chokeholds of the modern empire. He's actively engineering what he calls pure legal abundance, giving humanity an audible escape route from centralized control. The actual technology behind his patent is called SeedTreeDB. Instead of separating data and code, which creates friction, Smith unifies them into a living, growing digital organism. And to make sure it can't be hacked, paused, or captured by any centralized authority, he grounds it in pure mathematics, using a specific integer sequence as its mathematical DNA. It ensures continuous, organic growth that cannot be stopped. But he doesn't just stop at computer code. He applies this logic to the law itself. Smith uses a calculus called acceleration-driven clause learning. In computer science, this shrinks logic proofs. But Smith applies it to legal engineering to mathematically collapse a convoluted bureaucratic process of, say, 10,001 steps all the way down to just 3 steps. He calls traditional legal bureaucracy the sawdust meant to extract wealth, and he replaces it with the grease of auditable automated network contracts. That is a massive deflation in legal costs that completely cuts out the institutional gatekeepers.
Which brings us to the ultimate crossroads presented by our sources today, the mechatronic fork. On one hand, we have the critic's path, an opaque monoculture driven by elite narratives and centralized surveillance, the exact kind of system that boils the cure out of the lime for the sake of the machine. And on the flip side, the architect's vision, a decentralized network of distributed systems, auditable peer-to-peer code, and pure legal abundance, all fueled by hot-blooded, human prophetic anger.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're all left staring right into that Limey mirror ourselves. When we allow secular algorithms and bureaucracies to silently evaluate and process human life, we risk building an automated empire. The big question is, as these technologies of control grow more and more powerful, will you accept what Smith views as the mechanical processing of the empire? Or will you embrace the messy, sovereign path of the architect? Which path of the mechatronic fork will you choose?